If you've been playing Train Simulator for any significant length of time, you'll likely have stumbled across the European Loco and Asset Pack. It dates back to the very early days of the game in 2007, when it was originally released as Kuju Rail Simulator, and one of the locomotives included in that pack was the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway 7F Class 280. The Kuju model's looking very outdated by today's standards, but you'll soon be able to pick up a whole new version from Forth's Games. Feel free to play a drinking game by taking a preferably non-alcoholic drink every time I say 7F throughout this video. If you're wondering why my voice sounds worse than normal, that's because I'm currently dealing with a sore throat. It's been a hot minute since I last looked at a Forth's Games product, with the last one I reviewed being the S&DJR Y6 tram engine. Quite a contrast to the mighty 280, if you ask me. And in the time since the Y6's release, we also got the Nielsen box tanks. Before we go any further, I want to thank the developer himself for sending me a pre-release copy of the 7F, but this video is not sponsored. Going forward, I will only accept offers for pre-release versions of DLC if A. I'm genuinely interested in what's on offer, and B. I can still have full creative control over a video about the add-on in question. The 7F is not yet available to the public at the time of this video's production, but she will be available on Myths of Forth's Ko-fi store from the 26th of September 2025. I bring that up despite having no idea what this Ko-fi thing is. As an aside, when I started reviewing Train Simulator and Train Sim World content in 2022, I never thought it would get to the point where I'd have a developer contacting me directly with a view to offering what is essentially early access to their DLC. I usually keep to myself outside of occasional chats with friends on Discord, and despite the success of this channel, which I don't take for granted, I never thought of myself as being particularly important or up there in the big leagues, so to speak. When it comes to thinking about where my channel could go in future, I'll just take the road as it comes, or in other words, and to quote some lyrics from the criminally underrated Tony Basil song Over My Head, dive into the deepest ocean, not knowing if I'll sink or swim. And now for a very brief history on the 7F class. Although they have a family resemblance to other locomotives designed by Sir Henry Fowler, such as the 2P and 4F, they were actually designed by James Clayton, who was the Midland Railway's Assistant Chief Locomotive Draftsman. The first batch of 6 locomotives was built at Derby Works in 1914, followed by a second batch, comprising 5 locomotives, built by Robert Stevenson and Company in 1925. The 7Fs were used to haul freight trains over the steeply graded Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway, which ran from Bath to Bournemouth West, and they worked on that line right through LMS days and into the British Railways era. The first locomotive to be withdrawn was the Class Leader 53800, originally S&D number 80, going in June 1959, and the whole class had gone by September 1964, 2 years prior to the S&D's closure. As I said in my video about Golden Age developments and their Great Western Levels route, I'm aware of the new S&D route on which they are working, but it hasn't been released yet at the time of this video's production. Fortunately, two 7Fs have been preserved, namely 53808 at the Mid-Hants Railway and 53809 at the North Norfolk Railway. Although I was lucky to see the real 53808, albeit without her tender, when I went to the Mid-Hants back in April, my favourite member of the 7F class is actually a tie between 53802 and 53804. Kudos to anyone who can figure out why. Incidentally, seeing 53808 was one of the few good aspects of my visit to the Mid-Hants. It was a pretty stressful day overall. According to the manual, this add-on has been in development for 3 years. I've been looking forward to sending the old Kuju 7F to the scrap line ever since I saw the initial reveal of a new 7F. However, this is not the only new model of the class, but it's distinctly different from the other version released in February 2025, and I mean distinct in a good way. Personally, I like seeing different developers' takes on the same locomotive class, and regardless of whoever's made any given add-on, it's an impressive effort, and that's coming from someone who doesn't understand the more technical side of TS Classic, or how to make 3D models and their associated texturing and scripting, for that matter. If I ever did learn how to do all of those things, I can see myself modelling New Zealand's DSJ diesel shunter for TS, because this is a numerically small class whose design is fairly simple, and their details didn't change too much over the years. For reference, 5 of these locomotives were built in 1984 and 1985, and 4 of them are still in service 40 years later. In 2021, the class leader, DSJ 4004, bowed out after she accidentally went for a swim in Picton. To avoid getting sidetracked any further, I will return to discussing the 7F instead of going into further detail on the history of the DSJ. Upon looking over the locomotive, I am of the opinion that Mr. Forth's modelling is a vast improvement on the original Kuju 7F. The variation in this newer pack threw me off at first because, after over a decade of playing TS, I was so well accustomed to the Kuju model, which only has the small boiler variant in BR black with the early crest, or a fictional Prussian blue livery, for some reason. No tender cab, no proper S&D or LMS variants, no ability to give the engine anything other than a 5-digit number, nothing like that. The locomotives in the original 1914 batch were equipped with tender cabs, but these were removed in 1920, although a tender cab variant is available for all the liveries included in this pack. The 1925 batch were originally built with larger boilers, but 2 locomotives, later numbered as 53809 and 53810, were rebuilt with the small boiler in 1930. As an aside, the small boiler was apparently the same type as used on the Midland Railway compound 440s, of which one example has been preserved. 3 7Fs retained their larger boilers into the BR era, with 53808 having hers replaced in 1953, followed by 53807 in 1954 and 53806 in 1955. When new, the 7Fs were numbered from 80 to 90. Initially, They were renumbered in the 9670 to 9680 range upon being inherited by the LMS, but in 1932 they were renumbered again in the 13800 to 13810 range, in order to avoid confusion with an 080 design that was also designated as 7F. These things were numbered from 9500 through to 9774. Fortunately, the 4th Games Pack includes the 9670 through 9680 range, which means that I can show you locomotive number 9671, whose number is shared by one of KiwiRail's DL class diesel locomotives. This thing was built 104 years after the 7F numbered 9671, or 53801 as she would become in BR days. As for liveries, you get the authentic/working days liveries, plus bonus ducks in the form of some fictional ones. The authentic liveries are Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway Black, London, Midland and Scottish Railway Black, with either shaded or unshaded decals, and British Railways Black, but only with the late crest, while the fictional liveries are S&DJR Prussian Blue, S&D Photographic Grey, Midland Railway Red, complete with authentic decals, BR Lined Black, and BR Lined Green. You also get preservation error variants for 53808 and 53809, specifically both engines in their 2016 condition, along with S&DJR Prussian Blue, as applied to 53808 in 2008. As for why the 7Fs went to the continent and brought back an Austrian electric locomotive with them, I have no idea. In any case, I'm sure they got him back in Vienna. Suddenly, the puzzle's coming together. All the liveries, except the preservation ones, come with a large boiler variant and a range of customization options. If/when you get the pack for yourself, I highly recommend reading its manual for a full breakdown on the details you can change. To be honest, I find it hard to remember it all. I should add that the lamp irons and headboards are the only details you can change on the preservation variants. Everything else is locked on those engines. Hello, Tyrannosaurus Alan. I'm filling my water with volcanicity. On the LMS livery, you can change the number to anything from 1 to 5 digits, regardless of whether the number is prototypical or not. This means that you can have the 1914 built locomotives in a fictional large boiler condition, amongst other possibilities. The 4th Games Pack also includes a good selection of both passenger and freight rolling stock, with the latter being supplied in either Midland Railway or S&D liveries. The coaches are BR Mark I stock modelled by someone called Forerunner, whom I had never heard of until recently, and a nice little detail I noticed was this picture of a box tank inside the coaches. There are 6 variants of the Forerunner Mark Is included with the 7F, namely S15000, the prototype Mark I, in both original and rebuilt condition, as well as the BG, CK, TSO, and BSK. Thinking back to the customizable numbers, I initially thought that only the LMS liveries had this feature, but I was wrong. It turns out that you can change the numbers to be anything you want on all the included liveries. The 7F has an elaborate cab walk-around feature, which is very similar to what you get on the New Zealand Railways P-Class 280 from mainline models, albeit with different keybinds. In the case of the S&DJR locomotive, you need to press Shift and either W to move forwards, S for backwards, D for moving right, and A for moving left. You can also lean out of the cab by pressing Shift Q on the left-hand side and Shift E, as opposed to Markiplier E, on the right-hand side. Control Shift R takes you back to the normal position. As for the sound set overall, I can't comment on its accuracy because I didn't see either of the preserved 7Fs in operation, although that's not to say that the sounds are bad. Come to think of it, I never even went to the North Norfolk Railway, although I wish I could have gone to Norfolk. I'll try to get there if I ever go to England again, but for now, we've got no time to waste. We're getting out of this place. This place as in Castle Douglas in this case. You can quill the whistle by clicking and dragging it with the mouse, although quilling doesn't work if you're just using the spacebar. Personally, I wish you could change the whistle type on the 7F. If that was possible, I'd equip this thing with an NZR 6-chime whistle. What follows is a demonstration of the NZR whistle in action. As is tradition for locomotives with a power rating of 4 or higher at this point, I put the big 280 through an endurance test on the Port Road, initially intending to only go from Castle Douglas to Newton Stewart, but later deciding to continue all the way to Stranraer town. I would have run the 7F on the original Kuju era S&D route, which would be more appropriate, but out of personal preference, I decided to use Western Lines of Scotland instead. It's worth mentioning that the ideal fire mass for this locomotive is 780 pounds on the F5 heads-up display, or 75% on the F4 HUD. Normally, the brakes are controlled by pressing comma to apply and semicolon to release, but it's the other way round on the 7F. I haven't seen a setup like that since the Mesh Tools LNWR Super D of March 2017. Based on what the developer told me, the back-to-front setup on the 7F is due to him wanting the input controls to match the direction of the brake lever. As for the 280's large injector, it's controlled in the same way as what I'm used to, opened by pressing J and closed by pressing Shift J. It's a good idea to leave the ejector slightly open instead of fully closing it, otherwise the brakes might creep on a little bit. On the whole, and based on my experience, I think this locomotive is neither too easy nor too difficult to drive, although the backwards controls for the brakes will take some getting used to. Before moving on to the conclusion, we'll have a montage of 53809 passing various locations on her way to Stranraer. Feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp on screen if you'd prefer not to see the montage. At the end of the day, I've enjoyed pottering about with the Forths Games 7F. Once again, special thanks to the developer for the pre-release copy. This is an advanced locomotive, and I've found that she can make for a good challenge when you're driving on steeply graded routes. The Forerunner Mark 1s and Midland/S&D wagons are a welcome addition to a pack that can cater for people who prefer to recreate realistic/working days scenarios, as well as people who like to have fun by running whatever they like, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. Indeed, my favourite aspect of this pack is the fictional liveries, and you've seen plenty of evidence of how I like to play TS Classic throughout the course of this video. I may not have covered every single aspect of this locomotive, but I think I've done a good enough job at giving potential customers an idea of what you'll get for your money when you buy the pack. To be honest, I can't wrap my head around everything that's discussed in the manual. As for where I'd rate the 7F, I think this pack deserves an oddly specific 7.802 out of 10, and if you've stuck around to the end of the video, you win a pub band in London that performs covers of The Police. It's the Sultans of Sting